About 5 seconds. 4, 3.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final day and final hour of our UAA 2021 virtual conference. On behalf of the Utah Advising Association, I'd like to thank you all for being a part of our first virtual conference. I'd like to thank all of our presenters again, and all of the folks at UVU that made this conference possible. We are still planning on getting all the recordings set up for each session, and we'll post that on the UAA website, and we'll send those details out as they become available. I'd like to just quickly thank all of the UAA 2021 board members: Francis Peacock from Westminster College, Kim Wright from Utah Valley University, Liz Prettyman from Utah State University Eastern, Stephanie Begay, University of Utah, Kelly Shoup, Snow College, Sylvia Peralta, Salt Lake Community College, Mike Olson, Dixie State University, Carol Wiley, Brigham Young University, Craig Lewis, Southern Utah University, Aaron Bergeron, Utah State University, and Tyler Morgan from Ensign College. A big thank you, and a special thanks for Clint Moser and Kim Truesdell from Utah Valley University. Thank you, thank you. And now I want to turn the time over to Aaron Bergeron, who is our next UAA president for the 2021-22 academic year. We are excited to have Aaron lead us next year. So Aaron's going to present the Advisor of the Year Awards.
Thanks, Daniel. And Daniel and I are going to really buddy up digitally, and he's going to control the slides. But we just want to take just a quick minute to recognize those that submitted their application for the UAA Advisor of the Year this year. We had several nominees that the board was able to consider, and if Daniel would like to progress that slide, we just want to acknowledge just briefly all those from University of Utah, from Utah Valley University, and Brigham Young University that submitted their nominations this year. It was a really tough decision, as always, selecting an Advisor of the Year, because everybody out there does an amazing job and works hard to help provide really wonderful student-facing services at all of our institutions throughout the state. And so, without further ado, this year's 2021 UAA Advisor of the Year Award goes to Daniel. Anna Ortiz from Brigham Young University. Congratulations, Anna. Anna will be awarded a $250 cash award and a compensation registration fee for next year's Academic Advising Conference. So we're just so excited to be able to provide that for you, and we thank you so much for your services. And we'll turn the time back over to Daniel.
All right, yeah, congratulations, Anna from BYU. It's now my pleasure to introduce our final keynote speaker, Dr. Mitchell Colver. On a personal note, I've been following Dr. Colver for a while now with his work around predictive analytics and sustainable analytics, and all the innovational work he does in higher education. I was drawn to his work around aesthetic chills from music, all very, very fascinating stuff. It may be going too far to ask for his autograph, but maybe I'll save that for a later time. But on a more serious note, Dr. Colver began working in higher education in 2007, where his early experiences with students taught him to focus on the value of human diversity and human potential. As a thought leader in the field, he is frequently invited to champion the idea that student success can best be fostered through increasing intentionality amongst faculty, staff, and core leadership. His research has appeared in Popular Science, Discover, Slate, Smithsonian, New York Magazine, and internationally on Radio BBC. An honorary appointment as a visiting scholar at London South Bank University has allowed him to enjoy ongoing research in the UK about institutional effectiveness and student well-being. His prominence in the field has allowed him to serve as a leadership consultant for universities across the nation and globe. So this keynote address will highlight emerging student success metrics that showcase the strength of advising as key student success resources. Without further ado, I'll turn the time over to Dr. Colver.
Thanks so much, Daniel, and thanks, Aaron, for asking me to come and speak, and I'm really pleased to be here. I'm going to share my content now, share my screen, so hopefully y'all will be able to see that. And then once that's up, let me get situated here. Throughout the presentation, you'll be able to submit Q&A, which I can see in real time. So you'll use the Q&A feature if you have any questions that you'd like to ask. I may choose to answer them as we go along, just depending on time, or I may choose to save them all for the end, which is also just fine. I really encourage you to make comments and questions, and then we'll publish those in the Q&A feature of the Microsoft Teams environment. Today, we're going to be talking about championing advising, how analytics reveal the promise of academic advising. Now, for the last 5 years, I've been the director of the Center for Student Analytics, and I'm somewhat sad to announce that today is actually my last day on the job. I have taken a position to become the Vice President for Community and Development at Civitas Learning Analytics Corporation. So I'm staying in Utah for those who are interested. I'm going to work remotely in that position. But today actually is my official last day at USU. I will stay on as part-time faculty to do research and teach classes here and there and mentor students. So my relationship with USU will continue, but I will also be in the vendor environment. So you can at least listen to me with a little bit of a grain of salt, because next week I start with a corporation, right? So, all right, now getting into the slide deck here, I want to start by kind of introducing you to the Center for Student Analytics. The center was founded with this notion that analytics are useful for optimizing the higher education environment. However, we must, in our situation, we must use analytics with wisdom and develop our skill sets and strengths with analytics in a way that is not untethered, that doesn't become unmoored from the deep human connection that really makes advising work. And I'm going to talk about that later on. Whatever else our analytics have shown us, it's that human connection makes the difference for our students. So a lot of what I'm going to show you is pretty technical, a lot of data, a lot of visualizations that I'm going to share. But I want you to know that, you know, my training was as a therapist, and then I entered higher education and worked in an advising unit for 4 years, worked closely with TRIO Student Support Services, and was a retention specialist myself before coming to Utah State and working in orientation, and then finally moving into analytics. Now, the core of our work is, the vehicle of our work is student data, but the goal of our work is student success. And as it relates to advising, we talk a lot about the Advising Alliance. So advising matters. This is a quote from a little booklet that I'm going to share here in a minute called the Student Insights Report, where we publish little analytics insights to our community. And this is one of the lines from an insight that was about advising mattering for our students at Utah State. Meeting with an academic advisor each semester is one of the most important things a student can do to improve their chances of remaining enrolled and working towards graduation. Of all co-curricular programs and services we have studied over the past 3 years, participation in advising shows the greatest widespread association with student well-being, second only to students' experiences with faculty in the classroom. Now, obviously, students come to university to attend classes. That's the mainstay of the university offerings. And we know, research shows us very clearly, that faculty and classroom experiences are the main driver of student satisfaction and retention. When students are successful at a university, it's primarily because of what's happening with their experiences with faculty and peers in disciplines. But anything that wraps around on the side co-curricular and extracurricular that supports the classroom, that supports students' learning, really can help that core classroom experience do its work. Advising is most closely aligned with those disciplinary experiences, and so we're not surprised to see that advising truly as a co-curricular experience truly matters at our institutions. Now, why does advising work? What's the theory of change? Why is advising necessary? Well, the history of advising, I didn't really fully understand until I was invited to serve as a visiting scholar at London South Bank University. And when I got over there, I was pretty surprised to learn that academic advising is not a profession in the United Kingdom, because all of their majors, their academic programs, are modular, which means all of the 4-year plans, or mostly their 3-year plans, are actually blocked out. You don't make course selections in the United Kingdom. You sign up for psychology and you receive a module list. Your whole first semester is blocked off. Here's the courses you're going to take. Your next semester is blocked off. Here's the courses you're going to take. And as students progress through the coursework, they all move at the same pace. Now, if you don't pass a class, you can go back and repeat the class and take it again, but you still move on to the next modules. They don't have general education that's completed at what we would call high school or the secondary level in the United Kingdom. And so in England, in London, there was no academic advising required because students weren't taking whatever they wanted, and they didn't need to sign up for general education classes or a breadth life science or a depth humanities or whatever it may be. They were being given a schedule. That was their schedule. It's set. Now, why does it work differently in the United States? You may not know this, but at Harvard University, up through 1940, there was no such thing as a major. At Harvard, up through 1940, there were just a lot of course offerings through a lot of departments. Students could literally take whatever they wanted, often in whatever order they wanted. And then as soon as they had 120 credits, they would be receiving a diploma, right? And that was very common. It's true at Harvard, but it was true at most institutions, that there literally was no degree map. There literally was no major. What you took was just an open, almost like as if everything was an elective, an open sequence of classes. And you can kind of compare, like, and think about, you know, the staunch kind of United Kingdom, here's the classes you're going to take, and then this very rebellious, revolutionary American system, take whatever you want. What we have now in modern academic advising is kind of in the middle. Obviously, there's a lot of requirements that students must fill, and there's a lot of electives and choices that they have, especially as they fill their general education. And that is actually the main reason that academic advising must function in the United States higher education system, and why it's a profession is to help students navigate that curriculum. Now, how do we know that that is so important? At University of New Mexico, Chowki Abdallah, who used to be provost, and a colleague of his, Greg Heilemann, developed a way to map curriculum and score curriculum complexity using analytics. What you're looking at here is 8-term degree map of all the courses that are required of an electrical engineering program. All the circles represent the courses that are required for that major to graduate, lined up in the 8 terms that they exist in the degree map. The arrows represent co-curricular, they represent co-requisite and prerequisite relationships between classes. So anytime there's an arrow that's pointing from one class to another, that class is required as a prerequisite for the class that's being pointed at. This is a mess. And oftentimes this is what academic advisors help their students to figure out, is how to navigate this maze of curriculum so that they can be successful and hopefully complete in 8 terms. Well, what Greg and Chowki have figured out is that actually this web of prerequisites and co-requisites is often what gets students tripped up. Let's look at another electrical engineering program at a different institution. And the bottom program is actually a higher rated institution in electrical engineering. And what you'll notice is that the required prereq and co-requisite relationships are much reduced in the bottom program. And if you're an advisor, you think about this, which program would I rather be an advisor for, right? We can look at some of the features, right? So at the top in this electrical engineering program, which is not as highly rated, the longest path is 9 courses long. And that means if you fail any one of those courses, you're no longer on an 8-term plan, you're on a 9-term plan. If you fail 2 of the courses, you're on a 10-term plan. If you're on a, you know, and you keep adding years and years and years, okay? In the bottom, the longest prerequisite path is 5 courses long, which means that if you fail any one of those courses, the whole sequence can move like a mouse through a snake into the next term, and everything else flows around it. And so you can fail up to 3 classes in that sequence and have to repeat them, and you're still on track to complete within 8 terms. Now you might be saying, but Mitchell, surely all of those prerequisite relationships are necessary. And what we're finding in our data is that no, actually many prerequisite relationships are completely spurious. They exist because faculty 20 years ago had some idea about how courses connected, and now 20 years on, nobody even remembers why those courses have prerequisite relationships. And so reducing curriculum complexity is something to take serious, and I'm involved in a national project to help do that, and in particular here at Utah State. In the top program, you'll notice that Calculus 1 is related to 27 different courses through prerequisite relationships. In the bottom, Calculus 1 is related to 10, which seems a lot more sensible. And again, the bottom program is a higher rated program. So this web is what advisors help their students navigate. Now, why is that so important? Here at Utah State, we have all these different programs that have different complexity scores. Our lowest complexity scored program is International Studies at 39 points of complexity. And how you get those points is you're basically adding up those arrows and how long the sequences are, and eventually you get a score of 39. And you can go through all Utah State's programs here, all the way to the bottom right. You see Mechanical Engineering for Aerospace Engineering Emphasis, Bachelor of Science, complexity score of 379. Our average complexity score is 140 or 150, so 379 just is a beast of a curriculum. So why do we know this is important? Why do we know that how do we know that advisors are critical in helping their students navigate the curriculum? Well, this is a timeliness to completion chart. So what you have here is students who were able to timely complete within 4 years on the blue line, and students who were able to timely complete within 6 years on the green line. And across the bottom, what you'll see is the complexity score. So way over in our least complex programs like International Studies, that 39-point program, all the way over to our Mechanical Engineering Aerospace Emphasis of 379, way on the far left. And what you'll notice is that as there's a direct relationship, that as a major increases in its curriculum complexity, the percentage of students that are able to complete timely actually goes down, right? And so even in a 4-year, that almost nobody, 13% of students who start in those really highly complex programs are completing within 4 years. And then even only like 60% are completing within 6 years. And this tells you that, man, every semester a student adds to their program, that's time and money and an investment that really becomes a problem for them. And so we really want to reduce students' time to graduation where we can and where it makes sense. How do we know that this is causing students to leave the institution? This is a chart that's created by Civitas Learning in a software called Illume Students. And what it shows is the blue line and the red line here are, blue is students who end up persisting towards graduation, and red is students who don't. And what's being charted here is what's called the degree program alignment score. And you can see across the bottom here, 0.5, 0.05, 0.1, these are percentages. And the degree program alignment is a score between 0% and 100% of how many classes in a student's degree plan overlap with successful graduates in the same major. Let me say that again. Degree program alignment is a 0 to 100% score of how my degree plan as a student matches with successful graduates in my same program. So what that means is if I'm taking a lot of courses out of sequence, out of order, and in weird ways, I'm going to get a lower degree program alignment score. Whereas if I'm taking a lot of classes in the same order and in the same terms as a successful graduate in my program, I'm going to get a much higher degree program alignment score. So more towards the left on this chart is students who are taking a lot of classes out of order, and more to the right on this chart is students who are taking classes in the same order as successful graduates. And what you'll notice is that there's propensity here for students who don't end up persisting towards their goal of graduation to be clustered on this more left side of the graph. There's a red, the red line there exceeds the blue more on the left side of the graph. And on the right side of the graph, what you see is the blue line exceeds the red. And what that means is that students who are persisting tend to have greater alignment with successful graduates. So then you have to ask yourself, well, what produces alignment? And the answer is academic advising. Advisors are living libraries of how students can navigate these very complex webs of curriculum. Advisors are living libraries of advice of, you want to take this soon, you want to take this later, you can hold off on that, but you need to take this, I need you in this class, be sure to take this. And so when we can check our students' registration plans, in fact, we have a report at Utah State that was built by Michael Bjorkia, and kudos to her for building it. And I think she worked with a team. I don't know if I'm giving credit to everyone who credit is due, but it's a report that runs during registration that says, are students signing up for the classes that we have agreed that they would take on their degree works plan, right? So it's called planned versus registered. And it's a way for advisors to kind of check, are students taking what we've agreed upon, or are they going off course and loose cannon and doing whatever they want? A lot of times what we find is when the planned versus registered doesn't line up, it's because students actually want to change their major. And that's how advisors can actually reach out to them and say, hey, I noticed what we planned isn't what you've registered for. Can we do a quick check that this is still your major, that we're still on track, right? And that's a very clever way of keeping students enrolled and actually increasing that timeliness to graduation, getting those percentages up. Advising matters, at least in part, because advisors help students get in alignment with successful graduates in their program. So that's one of the things that analytics has taught us about advising. What can you do as an advisor to simplify your students' curricular paths? You may not be in charge of the curriculum, and a lot of universities, advisors are involved in the curriculum conversation. They can make recommendations for a reduction of complexity, like, hey, maybe we have too many prereqs. Are these all really necessary? You can reach out to me. You can email me if you have questions about how to measure complexity, and I can give you some resources on that. But how do you simplify your students' curricular paths? In all honesty, it is truly helping them make those degree plans. This is the Student Insights Report, the analytics lookbook that we publish each year at USU. And there's two different years here that I am going to have Aaron capture and send out by email, or let me ask actually Clint or Daniel, is there a way for us to get these into a chat box that everyone can see? If I maybe go to the meeting chat, or maybe I can submit a question. Oh, I can make an announcement. There we go.
Yeah, I was going to say it might be easier for you. Perfect. Perfect. Yep.
Okay. So that's there in the Q&A section. You'll be able to see that announcement. So those are two links. And actually, the reason why I want you to have those is because I'm going to model what you can do. If you click those links and save them for after the presentation, what you can do is you can go into our USU Digital Commons. Let me pull that up. And this is the Student Insights Report from fall 2020 last year, and you can download it. And once it's downloaded as a PDF, you can kind of start reading through some of the pages. So this is kind of the cover of the book, and then we have different, things about sustaining data excellence and data protection. And one of the first insights that appears in this little booklet is about remote-based advising, and we're going to come back to those in a minute. The one I want to show you has to do with degree works. So our 15th insight from last year was about degree works. And let me zoom in so that you can see what's going on here. I'll first read you the paragraph here, and then I'm going to show you the chart again. While all students benefit from having a degree works plan in place, the degree planning process is particularly valuable for first-generation students. Each semester, we use an analysis approach called prediction-based propensity score matching to estimate the impact of specific resources on students' likelihood to remain enrolled. When we examined the impact of degree planning on first-generation students, we found a unique pattern in the data. Rather than a degree works plan increasing their persistence rates, we learned that not having a degree works plan in place was leading to a decreased persistence rate. In other words, having a degree works plan provides first-generation students with a clear strategy or path for their studies that helps keep them engaged. Without this resource, there is a 3.95% drop in their persistence rates toward graduation simply because they do not have a plan in place. So that's what this graph shows. We do a propensity score match, and we find students who have a plan versus students who don't, who are well matched on a lot of characteristics, so we know it's a fair comparison. And then we look at those with a plan, being the navy blue line, the participant. They kind of stay true to the prediction, like 87.98, and then that's 88.17, so it's almost the same. Whereas first generation students who don't have a plan, that's the comparison group on the gray line, although they're predicted to succeed at 87%, which is a highly accurate prediction, when we fast forward to the next semester, what we find is that they only persist at 84%, which is that 3.9% reduction. Now, for our first generation students, that's about 40 people. And I can quickly calculate the net tuition revenue of losing 40 people a semester. At Utah State, we charge on average $23.69 tuition revenue per student per term. So it's about $100,000 a semester when we don't have first generation students in DegreeWorks. That's not, I mean, we don't always measure things in money. It's also 40 students who drop out of higher education because they didn't have a degree plan, right? So we don't want to see that. We don't want to see students leaving the institution simply because they don't have a degree plan in place. And you might actually have already made this connection, but the reason why degree planning is so important for first generation students is because they have a lot less likelihood to be able to navigate degree program alignment without advisor support. When you think about these degree maps that are so complex, if I have a parent who's been there before, they're going to help me know how to build a plan, you know. Whereas if I don't, and I'm going it alone as a first generation student, I don't have an advisor who can help me navigate that, I may not make appropriate choices in my selection of courses. So what can you do as an advisor to simplify your students' curricular paths? Literally helping them make effective, understood, and agreed upon, mutually agreed upon degree plans, right? So that DegreeWorks at Utah State's DegreeWorks, but whatever institution you're at, whatever degree planning tool you use, know that that degree planning work, especially when it's collaborative between you and the student, really makes a difference. Now, degree planning isn't the only thing that advisors do. So the theory of change is, what problem does advising solve? At most institutions, advisors also work as wayfinders. They make referrals, timely referrals at the right time to help students navigate the student ecosystem at any given institution, which is often very complex. So helping students to navigate becomes another key essential function of academic advisors. Now, the interesting thing is that our students are not all impacted by advising in the same way. Some need wayfinding much more urgently than others. One way to think about that using data is to break students into 4 success quartiles. What do I mean by success quartiles? So the top quartile would be the students who are most likely to be successful and persist semester to semester towards graduation. Moving down, there's a third quartile, a second quartile, and a bottom quartile would be the students who are least likely to be successful at the institution based on a lot of factors. Their GPA, their grades in high school, their grades in college, how often they're logging into Canvas, etc. So we make these predictions, these success quartile predictions. They're highly accurate. We kind of forecast how a student might be doing. What you're seeing here is the impact of academic advising on those 4 different quartiles, success quartiles. The navy blue lines are participants in advising. So they're students who've seen an advisor. The light blue lines are students who don't see an advisor. And we make these comparisons in each quartile. So let's start at the top. Students who meet with an advisor persist at a 96% rate in the top quartile. And those in that same quartile who don't meet with an advisor persist at a 95% rate. There's less than a 1% difference, and it's non-significant. So what this means is that there's kind of a ceiling effect. These students are gold star seekers. They get the gold star whether or not they meet with an academic advisor. And so it's not that advisors can't meet with top performing students, they can. It's just that they don't make as much change in the lives of those students as when they start to meet with, for example, third quartile students. In the third quartile, there's a 4% increase in student persistence if they'll meet with an advisor after controlling for self-selection bias, and we use robust statistics to make this a fair comparison, right? In the second quartile, moving down, there's a 10% gain from meeting with an advisor. And for our most vulnerable students who come to the university perhaps underprepared, there's a 13% gain for that wayfinding that is provided by the academic advisor. Meeting with an advisor is crucial for our underperforming vulnerable students, and that's what this data shows. And so the impact of advising is not the same across our entire student population. Now, how do we make those predictions? We use this system from Civitas Learning, it's called Illum Students, to kind of break our student population into red, orange, yellow, green, blue. And so red is those who have the least likelihood to persist based on a lot of factors. Blue are those who are most likely to persist. We don't show these to students. We try not to highlight that we're using analytics for predictions, because predictions actually can be wrong. In fact, they're built to be wrong about 15% of the time. So we do heavy ethics training to make sure that our advisors understand the strengths of these models, but also the limitations so that they're not weaponized. The reason why we prefer them to something like GPA is because students that leave USU without a degree, half of them are leaving above a 3.0. This is pretty common at most institutions. GPA is not actually the best sole indicator of whether or not a student's going to be successful. Now, a lot of these students that leave USU, they end up at other colleges, but we know that 70% of the people that leave USU don't end up at other colleges in 4 years. So when we see this 3.5 to 4.0 GPA, 27% of them are leaving. A lot of those are transferring, but some of them are dropping out. 3.0 to 3.5, that's 23% of our leavers. Again, some of them transfer, but many of them are dropping out of higher education altogether. And so when you have half of leavers leaving above a 3.0, GPA stops being your best single factor indicator of whether or not students are going to remain enrolled. And that's why we prefer the predictions that analytics can provide. Well, you can see that along the far left side of the screen here, you can see that these bottom quartile represents those red, orange, and yellow students. The second quartile is mostly those green students, and the third and top quartile are the blue students, right? And the reason why it's not proportionate is because most of the students at Utah State, when you look at the chart, most of our students are in that blue category, 78% of them, and then 14% in the green, and right? So actually we have some blue students trickling into the second quartile and some green students trickling into the bottom quartile, actually. So just be mindful. Now, the chart here displays that our impact on students is greatest when we can meet with those who are most vulnerable. But who are we spending our time with? And you can answer this question for your institution as well. I've worked with probably 24 institutions as a consultant, and I see the same data across the nation and globe. We are spending our time with the blues and the greens. This is very common. So these are charts that you read. Let me show you how to read them. The gray column is the overall caseload service. So there's 4 metrics being displayed here. Students with an active degree works plan. So 82% of the students have an active degree works plan in this unit, but 0% of the red and 0% of the orange students are being served with a degree plan. 29% of the yellow, 76% of the green, and 85% of the blue. So the gray column then gets broken out by the colors. You can see that, right? The next thing over, students with modified degree works plan. This means that the plan is being updated semesterly. So that happens 56% of the time. And you can see no service to red students, no service to orange students, 14% service to yellow, and so forth. What about those who are served with an appointment with an advisor? 70% overall, but concentrated in the yellow, green, and blue. And what about those with a graduation application? 42% overall, but concentrated in the green and the blue. Now, this is a dashboard I built. I architected this to help advisors to look at their productivity and also to look at the equity of their service. Now, these are old numbers. I think these numbers are probably 3 years old. We've come a long way, and you're going to see that here in a minute. I'm going to show you how good our data has improved because we're focusing on these issues of equity. You can see the slope of the trend line here is all positive, right? The lines move from the bottom left to the top right, and that's an inequity measure. When the line goes up like that, like a staircase, we're talking about inequity. And it's an equity gap because those red and orange students are not being served to the same extent. Without analytics, we can't focus and target our outreach to those students. And so what we really want to do is have the advisor remain the core point of intelligence in advising. Advisors have professional judgment and experience. They have a lot of clever ways to help students. They're caring, they're human beings, and they're very, very skilled. Formerly, they've had to sit at systems of record and systems of engagement. What does that mean? Systems of record are transcripts, they're high school records, they're things that we look at to make decisions about how we might predict a student's going to do. Systems of engagement are all the emails we send to students. Maybe if we're using text messaging and these kind of things, we talk to our students in that way. Formerly, before analytics came along, predictive modeling came along in advising, this is all the resources an advisor had. But now with analytics, oh, and previously this is kind of how it worked. Advisors had smiling faces and good hearts. They sent a lot of emails. Whether or not those emails got opened was up to the student. And they had an open door. Advisors, and I call this the open door advisor, right? Most of the advisor you've known in your life have had an open door. They've had a good heart, smiling face. They send emails to their students. But what we're finding is that that open door approach is it's the very thing that's producing these numbers of lower service to red, orange, and yellow students. So what we want to do is add these systems of intelligence that kind of help us to flag when a student might be at risk for not persisting. And those analytics reveal engagement opportunities. And when we take those serious, and this is actual data here, we take those serious. This is an advisor who has found a way to reverse those equity gaps, right? So now what you see is those trend lines are moving southerly as you move to the right, right? So rather than being staircases that go up, they're starting to look more like staircases that go down. And not all the way down, right? But like the trend is a downward facing trend. And that's an equity score, right? When the black arrow goes down instead of going up, it tells us that we're doing a better job of meeting those students where they're at. And what we've seen is that this actually drives persistence rates and graduation rates. So how has Utah State done over the last couple of years with driving down inequity? So these are all inequity scores, and I'll show you how to read this chart. Here we have our colleges. Really, we only have 8 colleges, but we have 10 or 11 advising units, right? We're broken up in different little advising clusters. So there they all are. These are the semesters moving across time. And what you have here is inequity scores. So a higher percentage is a higher percentage of inequity, and a lower percentage is a lower percentage of inequity. You want lower scores, and that's why they appear green. So you can look at the top college. They started with a 1.8 inequity score, and then it went down, and then it went down even more, which is the lowest number on the screen, that negative 7.1. And then for whatever reason, this college moved back up in fall 2020, maybe something to do with global pandemic. And then spring 2021, which is not complete, is there's still outstanding 9.8% inequity. So we're going to send this out to that college and say, hey, we'd love to see you get your numbers back to the way they were a year ago. You have till August 15th to do that because summer advising rolls into the spring numbers. So hopefully that college will do that. Maybe let's look at College G, right? College G has come a long way, right? They started with the worst inequity score on the screen. 16% inequity is huge. It's huge. And then they moved down to 11. There's a little backsliding, 13.6, 7.6, and now they're down to 4.6. What a good story. That is a college who has really taken these metrics seriously and seen that they can't afford to leave students out in the cold, especially those who are most vulnerable. Let's look at College H. This is a college that's really set a really good example. They started pretty low to begin with, and they have just driven that down. Now, this 3.2 on the far right side in College H is still not complete, so they still have till August 15th to get that down, and we're hoping it's going to go negative. One of the things that College H did that was really successful is they built what's called an advising success messaging platform. And what that does is it sends calendar invites, like to people's Outlook calendars, that gives them on a calendar. It says, this is the day and this is the time we want you to send the following success message. and it gives them the template that they can edit and make their own, tells the advisors exactly when and where the timely communication needs to take place, which students to target, and then they send those emails out. And we see that that very consistent, planned, intentional communication plan has really helped this college to keep their inequity scores low. We love to see that. Now, overall, the average you can see has been coming down. We started at 5.6 and we went up to 8 and 5.4, 5.1. And you might say, well, that's not that great. The 5.7 is still outstanding, right? We don't have the results, are not in yet because we wait till August 15th to look at that. You might say, well, that's not that big of a drop. But the real impressive thing is the standard deviation at the bottom. So the standard deviation is about consistency of score. This 5.9 is the greatest. That's spring 2019. And what that meant is that although the average is a 5.6, there's huge variation. There's some people who are really low, like a negative 3.6. There's some people who are really high, 16%. And you can see this visually just looking at the whole screen, that as we move to the right, there's less red and orange, right? And that's what the standard deviation is telling us, is that actually as Utah State has grown in using these techniques, we've gotten more consistent. We've gotten down to a 2.7 standard deviation, so that across all of these units this spring 2021 and moving up through August 15th, when these numbers will finalize, we have gotten a lot more consistent in reaching out to those vulnerable students. One of the things that's made that possible is actually remote-based advising. So let's talk about that. So this is another page in that Student Analytics Lookbook from this year. So I'm going to pull that up again. Again, I'm going to go to the Digital Commons. I'm going to click the download button, and I'm going to open that report. When I get to that insight, which is the first insight in the book, I'm going to show you what happened at Utah State. When we went into the global pandemic last year, we had never met with more than 6,000 students in the month of April. Right, we went into the pandemic in March. Amazingly, in April 2020, we met with 400 more students than we had before. And you can see in May and June that trend continued. We had gone from 2,000 to 2,700 and 1,600 in June to 2,200 in June 2020. In the midst of a global pandemic, advising via Zoom actually increased our ability to serve students. It was very impressive. We were very excited about that. Now, the other interesting thing is that while previously advising had been shown to have about a 5% lift, 6% lift in student persistence, in these remote-based terms, we saw that jump to 10%, a 10% lift for students who were participating in advising remotely. Why? What we surmised was that students in that vulnerable group, the red, orange, and yellows, they were missing in-person advising appointments because they had daycare, or because they couldn't get transportation, or because they were overwhelmed, or because they had to work a part-time job, or because. As soon as advising was available via Zoom, all of those vulnerable students could actually show up to their appointment because it was happening on their living room couch. And if the kids had to play on the floor or do their homework over in the corner, that was not that big of a deal. And so not only did we increase service counts to our students, but we increased service counts particularly to those vulnerable students. And that made it possible not only for them to attend advising, but it made it possible for advising to change their trajectory. Now, I saw questions. Let me go and read that. It's from Anonymous. Are there techniques or software that would help advisors individualize student course plans and regression, especially advisors who have higher caseloads? Yes. So I do actually think DegreeWorks fits the bill for that. Most degree planning software, you can insert a generic plan and then save that and populate it amongst all of your students in a given major. And then once you have that generic plan, like they would do in the UK, here's the classes you're going to take, then you can go in and start to customize that with a student. It still takes time. Group advising can help because a lot of times in a group, you're going to have students with the same issues, right? It's not always the same, but there are different techniques that you can use and different softwares can help with that. It's a good question. I may not be the best person to answer it because I'm not actually an academic advisor, but I do think that yes, that the customization of a course plan always starts with a generic plan. If you can get those loaded in generically in the first place and pre-populate them for students, that can save you a lot of time. So you can call that your suggested plan or your most common plan. One of the ways you can audit that is look at successful graduates in any given program, and you can call it the program of successful graduates. So if you look across a lot of graduates and you see them taking the same things in the same order, then you can say, well, this is the successful plan. This is what we want you to at least start with. So going back over here, how can we help students? How can we help students who have the red, orange, and yellow prediction? How can we get them in? Well, remote-based advising is one of the ways we can do that. Now, the other goal of meeting with these red, orange, and yellows, instead of using GPA, is to stop being reactive, like the open door advisor, and start being proactive, which means kind of going out to the rescue. You know, when we use an analogy of like a shepherd and their sheep, you never expect a shepherd to like build a shack in the middle of the pasture and then go inside and open the door to the shack and stick their head out and go, hey sheep, like if you need me, my door is always open, and then go in and sit at their computer in the shack. That's not what a shepherd does. A shepherd's there, knows their sheep, and they go to the rescue, right? So when a sheep falls outside the pasture, goes outside the fence, and they're susceptible and vulnerable to wolves and to lightning storms or whatever, the shepherd goes to the rescue, right? And that's what this is about, is the analytics help us to know which sheep are kind of straying outside the pasture fence. And it's those red, orange, and yellows. And if we only have an open door policy, we don't get those. We don't save them, because if you're in your office and my door is always open, you're not even going to know that the sheep is outside the pasture. So these predictions help us to know when a sheep is outside the pasture and run out and get them and say, hey, what can I do to help you? By the way, we don't reach out to students and say, hey, my computer just told me you're orange. Could you come and see me? We actually are a lot more sensitive than that. We just call them in and say, hey, time has passed. Could we visit with you and just see how things are going? Now, I gave similar training down, like a 4-hour, 5-hour workshop on the ethics of using predictive analytics and advising down in Florida at Broward College. And we did like a survey at the end of the 5-hour training, like how did this go? And this is one of the survey feedback that I want to share with you. So the advisor says, for the first time, I saw that I might not be as good of an advisor as I always thought I was. Your example of the open door advisor, always available to her students, but not concerned about conducting targeted outreach, really hit home, especially when I got back to my office and checked the GPAs of a week's worth of students I'd seen, some more than once. The students that actually need my help were not coming in. And so I took one of the data lists we were working from, emailing students who received D, F, or withdrew from one or more courses last term, and started calling them instead of emailing, which is what you suggested. I have 4 appointments now for next week with students who had never seen me or any advisor before. Not as many as I'd like, but it's a start. Thank you for gently making me take a closer look at my own best practices and giving me a new perspective and fresh momentum. Now, that business about making phone calls, vulnerable students tend not to answer emails, but they will pick up the phone. And they will respond to text messaging when text messaging has been indicated as being welcome. It's not always welcome. The reality is that reaching out to vulnerable students requires differentiated outreach. Differentiated means trying lots of different things. And you may just capture a few students here and a few students there, but if you're using just an email only, we call that a monoculture, right? And what that means is that I only know how to help my students by sending them emails, means you only are going to help most of your students, but not all of them. And so you really need to understand that differentiating outreach is a key aspect of being an advisor. Finding that emails will get 60% of your students, phone calls will get another 10%, right? And then how do we get the other 30%? Well, we're not going to be able to reach all of them. Maybe we won't meet 15% of them. So what do we do for the remaining 15%? Do we have peer mentors, peer advisors call them, or do we have, what do we have? At one of our campuses, USU Eastern, I've heard of advisors kind of looking at students' course schedules, and the campus is small enough that they kind of just go and linger in the hallway outside of where a student's class is going to be, and then they run into the student. It's a small enough campus that it's plausible, and they're like, oh, hey, like it's funny seeing you here. I've been meaning to see you, right? They take their laptop and sit at a desk and they answer emails while they're waiting for a student to walk by, so that can be a productive form of outreach. I don't know what to tell you to do, because what will be feasible for you as an advisor is between you and yourself. But we know that reaching out to students and targeting outreach to vulnerable populations drives student success, and that's really critical. All right, there's one last theory of change that I want to address, and then we'll move into Q&A, which is about human connection. While predictive analytics can help us spend time with the right students, those who need our help the most, that same data can't lead the conversation that those students need most. From my work, and this is me writing, with advisors at multiple institutions, I've come to appreciate that the first priority of advising analytics work is always the advising alliance, the rapport that exists between advisors and students. Research has repeatedly shown that human relationships, like those that students have with advisors, are a critical factor that keeps students enrolled when they otherwise would have left higher education. This makes a robust advising alliance both necessary and sufficient for facilitating student success. Whatever else I am, I'm not a data guy. I'm a human beings kind of guy. And I see this time and time again in all of our data sets, that human connection and the alliance that you have and the rapport that you have in investing your heart and your tears into your students is really what makes the difference. And that's the final thought I want to leave you with, is that you caring for your students is sometimes the thing that makes the difference for them. So thanks so much for having me share this message with you. You can reach me at that email address for at least another couple of weeks. And let's open it up for Q&A. So as you type your questions into the Q&A, I'm going to answer a question that is frequently asked of me, which is, isn't all these analytics a little bit Big Brother? And yes, it is. I require our advisors to go through 5 hours of ethics training before they're given the predictive analytics. A lot of that ethics training is about this idea that predictions can hurt, they can be weaponized, and that's not why we use them. That analytics training has been proliferated and been used by a lot of different institutions, that 5-hour session. And really it's about, I had an advisor say this to me, actually in Florida. He came up, he said, man, when I heard that there was 5 hours of analytics training that I had to attend, mandatory training that I had to attend, I was really frustrated. And he said, but now that I've been through it, the training on the poster, the title was, I think it was Augmented Intelligence and the Ethics of Care Using Advising Analytics or something like this. He's like, it shouldn't be this big fancy title about analytics. The training should just be called How Not to Be an Asshole Using Analytics. And I thought it was pretty funny that he came up and told me that after the training. So I do think that there are limitations to analytics, but overall, we're seeing these tools drive student success, drive student outcomes, and improve students' ability to reach the goals they've set for themselves in their interaction with our university. So that's the whole story. I don't see any other questions being typed in.
Dr. Colver?
I'll turn it back. Daniel, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I'm actually steeped in a dissertation about faculty perceptions of predictive analytics and early alert systems, but I've heard faculty advisors and others talk about predictive analytics being profiling students, and then access to resources. And anyway, your presentation beautifully pointed out that oftentimes we're inequitable. But can you speak to folks on campus that may have some serious reservations about predictive analytics and retention scores and things of that nature?
One of the things that we train on is the reality that 15% of all predictions made are going to be wrong. And when you understand that that's 1 in 7-ish, what it means is that you're not going to use it to profile your students. They've used predictive analytics in healthcare very successfully. So the best example is at Harvard View Medical in Seattle, where a nurse may have responsibility for 200 patients in beds in her ward or his ward, and the nurse sits at the desk, and there's analytics running on the patient's vital signs, trying to predict when they might go septic, which is something that people often die when they are in a hospital. It's your body stops cleaning the blood, and your blood gets really dirty, and it becomes poisonous, and it kills you. It's called sepsis. Well, analytics are really good at predicting when sepsis can happen, but they can be wrong. So the way that the system is designed is to turn a light on, just saying, dear nurse, you need to go and spend time with this patient. But once the nurse gets to the hospital bed, the analytics don't matter anymore. The analytics are just signaling you need to be together with your patient. And once you're there, the nurse makes his or her own assessment. And the reality is that a lot of times they say, oh no, this does look like sepsis. Let's get antibiotics ordered. And since 2011, when it was implemented, it's been saving lives. Their sepsis rates, death by sepsis rates have gone down. Now, the reason why it works is because if the nurse knows better, they simply turn the light off. And then it can come back on every 4 hours or whatever. But in one example, a nurse went in and the light had turned on and she looked and she said, well, yeah, this looks like sepsis, but I actually know this person was in a motorcycle accident, drunk driving. And so they have elevated heart rate and they have elevated respiratory rate and they have elevated temperature because they're in alcohol withdrawal. And it looks like sepsis, but you're going to be fine in 3 or 4 hours. So I'm going to turn the light off and go back to my desk. The reality is that the analytics signal when human contact is necessary, but once the human contact takes place, the analytics almost do nothing. So to use analytics to profile people, I think that that's inappropriate. And that would be continuing to use the analytics once the human interaction is initiated. Whereas if analytics just get a student through my door and then I just connect with them about their lived experiences and the analytics go in the drawer, then that's not profiling. It's literally just checking in with students who are on my caseload anyway. So I think it's an important question. And I think that this is why training, robust training, is the solution, not throwing the tools away and saying, oh, that's Big Brother or that's profiling, but saying every tool has 2 handles and you just have to be sure you're holding the right one.
Thank you so much. That's a powerful analogy too.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Thanks for the question. And thank you all for being here for the keynote. And I sure appreciate, and reach out if you have questions. Again, my email, I'll put that in the box there. And you certainly can email me. And then the slide deck will be available to those who are interested. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Colver. It's always a pleasure to hear you present, and really gives the academic advising community a new view on what we do and the tools that we can utilize to help better serve our students. So we really appreciate your time, and we also want to wish you the best of luck in your new position at Civitas. And I know that you'll be missed greatly at Utah State University, and we look forward to opportunities that we have to continue to work with you alongside other institutions in the state of Utah. So I just want to thank everyone who's attended the virtual UAA conference over the last several weeks and really sticking in there with all of us as we've had a very unique 14 months this past year, and continue to push forward and flourish as academic advisors within a pandemic experience and community. And just know that you guys all really make a difference for your students, and we just appreciate you so much. I just want to tell everybody that I'm so excited for next year and to be able to be the new president for the Utah Advising Association, and to work with my fellow board members in preparing what we hope to be a wonderful in-person conference next year, which will be held at the Zermatt in Midway. And so we really look forward to seeing all of you again and your smiling faces, and hope that you have a wonderful summer and a really strong start to a new academic year. Thanks so much.